and we were all logging our changes, we had everything documented in one spot, one single thread, you know. And the rest of this text shows you some examples of how we were exchanging not only our observations during a special event, you know, so I was taking pictures and putting captions with it, but we have also, you know, like I think there's one over here in the third from the left, you know, where I'm asking Jeremy if we could increase the split at Airport Road, you know, and you know we had some exchange saying this is what I did, you know. So having this ability to collaborate live, especially in an event like a special event like this, where we got one shot, you know, the next event of this size is probably the next year or several years, you know. So we want to make sure that we make the best of the time that we're out there, and we found this to be a really great way to do that. And the last takeaway I want to share is Bluetooth, right? Bluetooth is not anything new. Everyone's used Bluetooth for travel time, or at least have heard of it for using it for travel time. But what I want to share today is the different ways we can use Bluetooth data to tell us, to help with the before and after storytelling, right? For those of us who are not familiar with Bluetooth, let me just give a quick overview on what it does. You know, Bluetooth is, you know, we typically use, when we say Bluetooth, there are several ways of collecting data. We could either collect Bluetooth from Wi-Fi, collect MAC addresses from Wi-Fi signal, or from Bluetooth radios, right? And a MAC address is just a unique identifier to every radio, you know. And what it allows us to do is that if you have multiple of these Bluetooth data collection readers or Wi-Fi readers located on your system, you're able to take a timestamp of when you've detected a vehicle passing through that device, you know. And in this case, the system we used, we collected 3 points. You know, when a vehicle enters the field of capture, we record that as our first detection. When the vehicle reaches is at its strongest signal to our reader, then we log that as strongest detection. And when it leaves our field of capture, we log that as a last detection. And this is important because we are able to create some special metrics out of that. But the traditional Bluetooth metric is that it uses one of these timestamps, and it compares it with another timestamp downstream, and then from that you get your travel time, right? So it's an easy way for you to get travel times without actually driving the corridor, you know, and getting more samples. So just a quick overview, using Bluetooth Low Energy, we got roughly around a 20% to 30% rough estimated match rate. This varies. That is not an exact science here. All we did was number of matches we got divided by ATR volumes. And I'm happy to elaborate on why that's an estimate if anybody has questions. But the point is that it's not 1%. You know, we're getting something on the order of 20 to 30%, depending on time of day. But here's the first thing. So when we did our travel time analysis, we looked at compared median travel times. You know, just to orient itself with what you're seeing on this screen, the stuff in gray is our before travel times throughout the day, right? The axis is time of day. And then the chart on the left is the northbound direction, chart on the right, southbound direction. You know, it doesn't look too great. You know, my first reaction was, oh, did I make it worse? You know, did I make travel time worse in the northbound direction? And this is the problem with travel time. It implies that we did an okay job, I guess, you know, but like, you know, the southbound, we made some improvements in the southbound direction. You could argue that maybe the savings in the southbound direction was greater than in the northbound direction. But even in the southbound, if you look at the PM peak hour, travel times would suggest that we made it worse during the PM peak hour. And that's probably a fair statement if you just look at travel time. But the thing is that travel time doesn't tell the full story. First of all, when you're traveling the corridor, you know, that travel time, like a difference of 8 minutes and 8 minutes, 30 seconds. I mean, are you really going to feel that difference? You know, is that something you're really going to notice? What you'll probably notice is how often you're stopping. Is it annoying? Are you getting released and then are you stopping at the next signal? And I'm sure most of us who read time signals can relate that while our models may focus on travel time, when we actually do our fine tuning is more so on human factors and making sure the timing makes sense as a driver, right? travel time doesn't capture that. So that's the next thing that we did was we looked at something called percent slowdowns, right? So we don't call it stops because we don't know if a vehicle actually stopped at a light. But what we did was because we knew how long a vehicle was dwelling within the field of capture, and we could match that MAC address with the downstream and upstream intersections, we actually know based on the number of probes we detected going through every signal, we know whether they're what we call a slowdown occurrence or not, right? And that slowdown threshold is just calculated based on the free flow speed divided by the capture radius, right? Or as a function of the capture radius. So we were able to come up with a time threshold of if they're dwelling for X number of seconds, then we consider that as a slowdown. So one of the great things about slowdown is now that's a bit closer to what a human would feel, right? You know if you're stopping along a corridor. And the thing about our trial time results is that it went against the general feedback that we were getting, from the public. Like almost immediately, we got responses from the public asking, "What did you do differently on that corridor? It's operating a lot smoother now." And a lot of folks were telling me from the city as well who weren't as involved with the retiming, the details of the implementation. They gave us feedback that it felt the traffic, especially in the south section, felt a lot smoother. But our travel time results didn't show that. This is where the percent slowdown helps, because we can see at an intersection by intersection level what was the change in percent slowdowns. One of the strategies we did was we actually decided to break coordination or run Hilltop to Pemberton, which is our northern section, as under a separate coordination plan, so they were no longer coordinated. So if you see this spike up in percent slowdowns on Hilltop, that's because that's where we are breaking coordination, But this just validates our strategy, and it shows us where we're seeing more slowdowns at every intersection, right? And this table really highlights the difference between the two, right? This is a table that just summarizes. Usually when we are summarizing things for decision makers, we're summarizing things as simple as possible. So we have a table here showing our travel times and our percent slowdown comparisons. And if you look at travel times, you'll see red. Red means increase in travel times in the northbound. Southbound is green. You could say it's a mixed bag. You could say I see more red than green, so therefore it's worse. That's the problem of the optics of using just travel time. But when we actually compared slowdown occurrences and when we compared the feedback that we were generally getting, it was positive across the board. And if we look at percent slowdowns, we're generally slowing down. We generally reduce those slowdown occurrences, which is, I think most people will agree that's better, So why was this the case? A lot of it was how we managed queues in the south section. It didn't prioritize throughput as much as it prioritized queue management. That was one of the reasons. But this is just an example of how we could use Bluetooth in a slightly different way than just collecting travel time data, but also trying to tell the story of quality of progression. The other item that was a sort of experimental thing that we did that we didn't use in the early stages of our project was something called corridor trajectory. Well, that's what we call it. And this diagram basically shows you from left to right, those are intersections along our corridor, and the shaded colors show you where, like the first row here, first to Lake Elmo, shows you travel that only occurs between 1st, 4th, 6th, Alkali Creek, and Lake Elmo only. So it's a unique travel pattern along this corridor, and that's 11% of all travel on this corridor. So the bottom line is, and then it kind of reduces from there. The next line is 1st to 6th, and that's 10%. But the bottom line is, it shows you a lot of detail here, but you can just see that there's a huge swath of colors between 1st and Lake Elmo, and that's consistent with how we broke up our corridor. People are primarily traveling the south section as one subsystem. Some people do travel the entirety of the corridor, and to know that, you just look at the colors. Do you see any colors going from 1st all the way to the right side of the screen at bench? And you don't see a lot of that, right? There's like 3% of travel from 1st to Pemberton. So the point is that this data just shows us where people are traveling along the corridor. And if you're trying to create subsystems for your corridor, it helps. In our case, it validated how we created those subsystems. But if we had this data earlier, we would have made this, we would have used this as justification to where we maintain coordination and where we would break coordination. So yeah, that's about it. One of the things on this project was, because we had all this interesting data, we were able to create nice infographics like this, what we call a signal timing brief. This is a 2-pager brochure that we can just share, not just to our signal timing friends, but to other decision makers as well, just to know what's going on this project. And our client liked the percent slowdown metric so much that they actually told us to focus on that in our brief. We initially had travel times and slowdowns, and it got too overwhelming. So just focus on percent slowdowns. That's consistent with the feedback we were getting anyway, right? So, what did I share today? A few key takeaways on projects. Hopefully, these are things that are not rocket science, that any project can really take advantage of this. But number one, where you're trying to understand complex circulation issues, explore using a drone. Drones, a lot of data collection firms now are able to do that, and if you need any context, I'm happy to help get you connected to them. But, drones are a great way for you to collect, to just understand traffic circulation issues. And on top of that, it's documented, so you can go back and review that. So always recommend doing it where you're trying to get global perspective or network perspective. Transsync or other tools like True Traffic. If you're doing signal retiming, modifications, fine tuning along a corridor, and you're going to be traveling out of town to do that, recommend trying to get something like Transsync down, because it's just a great way for you to document changes and also for you to just eliminate some of the guesswork. Especially in these COVID-19 times, if you're working with different folks and trying to maintain social distancing, consider using things like Teams, Microsoft Teams, Slack, or WhatsApp. These are all tools that are available on your mobile phone. It all helps you keep conversations in one single thread, and it digitizes some of that documentation, some of that discussions, And lastly, Bluetooth. We use it for travel time. But while you're doing that, let's explore other metrics. You can squeeze a lot more out of Bluetooth. There are many different systems out there, so they all vary a little bit. But generally, just understand that Bluetooth can do so much more than travel time, and travel time doesn't tell you the full story when you're trying to retime a corridor. I'm not saying it's not a good metric. I'm just saying that it shouldn't be the one metric. You want a variety of metrics to tell you a holistic picture of what's going on. So yeah, that's it with my presentation. If anybody has any questions, feel free to email me or put them in the chat box, and I think Maggie will highlight those questions for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Eamon. While we switch to our next presenter, I encourage you to type your questions in the question box. I'll be monitoring all those questions, and we'll save the Q&A sessions after the next presentation. Judy.
Well, Patrick Mahedy is our next presenter. Patrick is a signal timer and policy champion for automated traffic signal performance measures with the Oregon Department of Transportation in the Portland metro area. Prior to ODOT, he worked at DKS Associates doing signal and ITS design. Outside work, he enjoys being outdoors, cycling, and cooking.
Patrick, you might be muted.
Thank you. I was wondering if you could see the presentation.
Yes, we can see your presentation.
Perfect. Well, thank you for having me. I just wanted to touch on a few things that Eamon presented on because I thought they were really interesting. It kind of highlighted for me that modeling is a tool, and that like using drones and TransLink help you get the real world perspective you need to make those small timing adjustments. Simple things like pedestrians can throw off a timing plan if you're getting a lot of transitions or other things. And those are things that modeling can't tell you. So when you're in a situation where your whole roadway is built out to the way that you're designing your timing plan, there's really nothing better than being in the field. I guess before I start on my presentation, I just wanted to do a bit of background on automatic traffic signal performance measures for people who aren't as versed in the developments in signal timing. Right now, the Oregon Department of Transportation and a lot of local jurisdictions in the state are moving from older Voyage 2070 controllers to in-light ATC controllers. The big difference between those two is that the Voyage controllers took data every 15 minutes, and the new in-light controllers take data every 0.1 second. So there's a big increase in the data resolution, and that has allowed us to start looking at things that we couldn't look at before, because we know the vehicle phase state and all the detector states in a really high resolution. So yeah, and I guess a lot of that was developed at UMann's alma mater, Purdue, and then packaged together with various DOTs into automated traffic signal performance measures. At ODOT, we use the UDOT open source code for those performance measures inside of InnoLight. And thanks to Julie, we have a few test sites set up. When she was at state, she helped us fund getting that work done. And one of those test sites was conveniently located to do some analysis for COVID-19. So we'll just jump in. As a signal timing group, there's 3 of us in Region 1, and then, I guess there's 4. We were sitting down looking at COVID-19, trying to understand travel patterns, trying to understand the opportunity for retiming. And we were looking at just the base data for a while. We hadn't put together a report. Statewide Technical Leadership Center helped us out and made this report, which is all of the traffic signals in Region 1 and the number of detector actuations. So it's a crude instrument to kind of look at what the change in travel or volumes are across corridors. In the dark teal is the 2019 numbers. You can see it's pretty flat. 2020, the dark red line, you can see dips down starting in March, kind of around the time that the stay-at-home order was issued. I think this week here, well, I'll just do this. But the week before was before the stay-at-home order. So I think the stay-at-home order was on March 23rd. And we made a number of timing changes to arterials in the Portland metro area on March 26th, like 99E, 99W, Oregon 212, a lot of the major corridors. We made some timing changes. So yeah, when we were meeting as a group, it was kind of hard to figure out how much effort to put in. As you saw in Yimann's presentation, if you're doing timing from scratch and creating a whole new plan, it's a lot of work. We didn't have time to do that, so we fell back on the timing plans we already had. At most ODOT locations, we'll have an AM plan, a midday plan, and a PM plan. And the midday plan has a lower cycle length and can deal with lower volumes better. So we made the decision on most corridors that we would be no longer using the peak plan because the volumes were between 20 and 50% lower, and we would use the midday plans instead. And then for the midday periods, we had to decide whether we wanted to leave them in the midday plan or to go free, to no longer be in coordination. And to make those decisions, we didn't have a lot of data to go off of, but we did have some kind of historic timing practice, which was to not begin coordination for a single lane approach until you reach 400 vehicles per hour, and to not do that for a double lane approach until you reach 600 vehicles per hour. So those were what we used to guide the timing changes we made. So we used a mixture of signal performance measures and then some work that have been done to automate some of those older logs to look at volume profiles. And I just wanted to focus on the changes made along the 99E corridor, which, if you're unfamiliar with it, starts in Milwaukee. So if you bike, the Springwater Corridor Trail is kind of at the top of this picture. And then it goes all the way down through Oregon City and through Gladstone to Oregon City. The 21 signal system, they're all coordinated with each other. And there was a 50% drop in mainline traffic, kind of end of March. It's gone up a little bit since then. We had decided to set the AM plan to midday, as discussed. We set the PM plan to the midday plan. And then we set the midday plan to free. And we did some shifting of the coordinated periods using those volume thresholds we talked about. In this case, it's a dual lane approach. So we use 600 vehicles per hour. As we were discussing this, there was a lot of interest from management in measuring the timing changes because we didn't know how long this situation would affect the transportation system, the moving schedule for when we're going to open up, and predicting those travel patterns is hard. It's kind of the inverse of a normal timing situation. In a normal timing situation, you're trying to adjust for growth in the region, and you're trying to make small efficiency gains over a long period of time. In this case, we're trying to make large efficiency gains over a short period of time because the volume patterns have changed so significantly. And then to do that, I guess, a measurement of the timing change impact, my teammate, Alana Cosma, suggested using the Utah traffic signal performance measure for approach delay. So it's a way of measuring simplified delay at the intersection. We only have one intersection on the corridor that was set up to do that calculation, which is Oregon ITE at 17th and Harrison in downtown Milwaukee. And it's not the ideal location because it's split phase, but we went ahead and used it anyway to get a bit more into approach delay. This is what the Utah open source code generates. It'll generate a graph for you with vehicle delay on the y-axis and time throughout the day on the x-axis, and it'll generate a total amount of delay at the intersection. The way it does that is it's measuring the time between a vehicle arriving at the signal and receiving a green light. So it's very limited by your detector layout, which in this case for the main line are 120 feet, and for the side streets are 75 feet. I don't know if I can leave really quick, but if you guys are not familiar with ODOT detector layout, it's kind of like this. This would be phase, I guess the horizontal would be phases 2 and 6. We don't have stop bar detection. And we have some advanced detectors on the side streets. Our advanced detectors are 75-foot loops. So effectively, the calculation that we're doing with the performance measures is limited to the number of cars that could fit within that detection zone. So for the side streets, we'll start getting error after about 4 cars when it reaches the 75-foot loop. And on the main line, we'll start getting error with 6 cars waiting. So there's some limitations to the calculation, but we were hoping with the lower volume, it would still be accurate enough to get some information. So just jumping into the results, we used the before day of Tuesday, March 24th, and then checked the 3 consecutive Tuesdays to get this. It shifted a little bit as time went on. As volumes increased, these timing changes became less and less effective at reducing delay on the corridor. And the big thing to look at here was just the gains for the time periods that shifted to a free operation. And this is just because you're serving vehicles and you're not holding the main line for cord. So usually you have large platoons of vehicles on the main line, and you want to hold side street and left turn vehicles to get and progress that traffic through. With that traffic being much lower, and this being a commuter route, there really wasn't a need to be holding those vehicles, and we were actually creating excess delay by holding them. So if you look at the 8:30 to 9:30 period, saves 15% delay, and then in the midday period from 9:30 to 2:30, saved 21% in the delay calculation. that the Utah performance measures were calculating. And then to kind of validate that what we were seeing made sense, we looked at it per phase. So the phase 2 and phase 6 are the mainline approaches at this location. And because we are no longer holding in coordination for those phases, we expect to see delay increase there. So the values in red are increases in delay. All of the side street and left turn phases decreased in delay. So just seeing things that we would expect to see, but it's good to validate them in real time. We can pull this information the week after making changes. And that's really the strength of signal performance measures, is that we can make small changes and measure them much faster and be much more flexible in the timing changes we want to make. So the conclusion for that section was mostly just that we saved a lot of delay in the free periods, and that the historic volume thresholds that we had of 400 and 600 vehicles for the start of coordination were accurate. I don't know if they're the most accurate, but like it could be 550 vehicles or 650 vehicles, and somewhat dependent on land use. But overall, they worked for what we were trying to do, which was reduce delay for the greatly lowered volumes across all of our arterial corridors in the region. And then just to get a better understanding of the return on investment of the time we spent doing this, we made some assumptions for the whole corridor. I, again, do not think that 17th at Harrison, the location measured, is a great approximation of the rest of the corridor, because it's an intersection with a lot more side street volume, and therefore would show greater saving in delay, because we improved all those side street movements. So we made the assumption that we were going to take 40% off of the delay decreases we saw to get kind of a range of what we thought the delay savings was and what we thought the return on investment was for the corridor. We calculated the benefit through June 1st. I actually undid the timing June 2nd. So 50 work days, and it took about 24 hours of timing and analysis to do the work. And the delay cost savings for the unreduced, so just assuming every signal is like the test location, was $150,000, and the return on investment of 42. And then the reduced version was $55,000 and a return on investment of 15. These are pretty high returns on investment, and just kind of follow up with what FHWA always pushes, which is that signal timing has a high return on investment. And then to further validate kind of the findings, we reverted the timing on the night of June 2nd, which you can see here in the delay adjusted for volume. You can see that the delay increased after changing back to the plan that it usually runs. That's because volume is still down on the corridor, and even though it went up here, I feel like it's balanced out by other locations that have less side street volume. So that's why we reverted timing when we did. We wanted to kind of expand this thinking to other corridors. So we were looking at, what can we do with these signal performance measures that we're not able to accomplish with other things. And one of the things that we really struggle with is doing weekend timing, because it's overtime and it's just not a high priority. We usually just take the midday plan and apply it on the weekend. But it's not very often that those timing plans are looked at. When does coordination start? So we wanted to apply those to weekend plans using those volume thresholds and see how much delay we could save by optimizing our weekend plans, even if we're not redoing the timing plan. If we can update when the timing is starting and ending every year, it gets us closer to being, a fresh timing or an efficient timing. So we did that on a 10 signal system in Oregon 212. Awana did the timing for that. and we found there was a 40% reduction in delay in the periods where the volumes were below threshold, but it was still coordinated. And if we assume that it took about 8 hours of work to find that, over a year, that a 1 hour change of the time of day plan to fit those volume thresholds would return a 40-to-1 return on investment for that work. So that's something that I think we're going to try and do more often and institutionalize, is just going through once a year and updating those timings based on signal performance measures or the volume data we have from our 2070 controllers. Yeah, and then go to questions.
Thanks, Patrick. We do see some questions coming in, and I'll start with questions for Eamon. He's already typed some responses to the questions, but I would like to go through them again and have him answer again. Sorry, Eamon.
Yeah. Do you want me to recite the question and I can provide my response?
Yep.
Okay. So the first question is about what was the threshold that we used to in miles per hour to classify a vehicle as slowed down. So to clarify, the threshold we used was what we call a dwell time. So it's seconds. It's not a speed unit. So what we did was that the idea of the slowdown occurrences is that we first flag a trip as a slowdown occurrence if it enters a signal, a range of capture, which is, in this case, we had our Bluetooth readers deployed at the intersection, right? So since they're at the intersection and they're within the capture radius, the product we used actually told us the dwell time, how long it stayed within that capture radius. So that was how we first identified what's the dwell time, and then we looked at upstream and downstream to see, is that a continuous travel or is that just a left turning vehicle or right turning vehicle, so because we want to know for vehicles that are traveling through the corridor, only the through movements, how many of them are dwelling. So that's how we filter it down. So then the question is, what's the threshold? The threshold is in seconds. I don't recall the exact number. It's either 10 or 15 seconds. And the way that was developed was really just physics, based on assumed free flow speed of a vehicle traveling in that corridor and our understanding of Bluetooth low energy capture radius. We calculate, we developed something like, I think it was like I think it was just a little bit off from 10 or 15 seconds. I don't recall now, but we just rounded it to a whole number like 10 or 15. But that's how we developed the thresholds, either 10 or 15 seconds based on the capture radius, and we looked at the intersections upstream and downstream to identify if it's a through movement, and that's a very important step that we had to do. So then more of a comment and a question, I just attended a TransSync webinar this morning. Before this webinar, they were presenting from the perspectives of public agencies and the tool developers. It's good to hear consultants are using this tool. I agree. I think I found it really useful, not just because it eliminated the guesswork, but there are existing products like this. When I was in Florida, where I started my career, we used a different tool called True Traffic, and that was also a really great tool. Did the same thing. You were able to sync up your timings and see what is you actually plot your progression through a time-space diagram. But what I really liked about TransSync is that it's available on an iPad app. So it just made it really easy. You're not lugging around a laptop with a GPS radio on it. And, this is an app that you just hold in your hand. You can put it on your dashboard. You can take it out and walk, like stand outside and watch the signal. So just the ergonomics of how it works, I found it to be really, really helpful. I'm not sure if True Traffic has an iPad app yet, but that's another option to consider. And the last question I see here, is what are some metrics that you used in evaluating the retiming effort, and how did you find them useful? So for our before-after study, we primarily focused on travel time and that quality of progression, or the number of slowdown occurrences. That was what we reported. We also looked at, because we had Bluetooth readers at every signal, we were able to get at a segment by segment level what were the average travel speeds, and that allowed us to develop a speed contour diagram. Those were things that we never put in our report because it was redundant or it didn't really help with the overall message, but that gave us a lot more granularity at where the slowdowns were actually occurring signal by signal, and over time of day, so it was, we were able to create different kinds of visualizations internally based on the same metrics. We just sliced it up into smaller time slices, so just more granularity with what you already have. We found that to be really helpful. When it came to the actual, not the assessment, but the development of the timing plans, when we were relying on model results, we looked at a lot of the stuff that Synchro spits out from their arterial, I forget what the report is called now, arterial MOEs, I think is what it's called. But the big one for us that we don't have a real way to collect that is dilemma zones. A number of dilemma zone occurrences. That was a big reason why we adjusted some of the offsets, was to try to minimize on some of those dilemma zone occurrences. And then for the future, if I were to, what would be nice is, other than some of this stuff that I already presented on Bluetooth, is some of the stuff that Pat presented on ATPSMs. That's in this case, we didn't have the luxury of having that at our signals, but it would have been cool if we were able to get phase terminations, number of force off or max out or gas out. So those kind of metrics I think will be really helpful. The Purdue coordination diagram would also be neat. I'm not sure how we would present some of that information. I generally try to find metrics that we can summarize, so it's easy to tell the story. But I think there's a lot from ATPSMs that we would like to, if the conditions are right, we would have liked to use that.
Thank you, Eamon. The last two questions were both from me, and thank you very much. There's one more question for you. Did you cover the pedestrian phases? If not, was TransSync helpful at telling you where you were in transition?
Right. So in this case, in our corridor, there was maybe one signal where we had, if the pedestrian phase came on, it would throw it out of coordination. That was a low pedestrian volume intersection, and we figured the only time that would happen would be during a special event when it's running free anyway. So so that was just one location in terms of our timing strategy. In terms of TransSync and its ability to detect that, it doesn't have any particular, there's no flag. It doesn't tell you, it just tells you what the signal should be doing at this time. So the way you would tell that something's in transition is similar to how we detected when we identified when the clock wasn't synced up or wasn't right and the controller was, if the force stop points don't match up with what you're seeing in real life, if let's say you should have force stop here, but you're seeing green, the main line is still showing green and you're seeing the man, that's how you know that something is up. You won't know if that's specifically pedestrians. You got to observe it and see whether they're pedestrians at the light, but you would at least know that something is, that particular cycle, something is wrong. That's how we troubleshoot stuff.
Yeah, thank you. And Patrick, I can also speak to the TransSync's capability. This software, it doesn't communicate with the controller, so it can't know where exactly in transition the controller is at. It basically uses your engineering judgment and what the software tells you the signal should be doing when it's in coordination, and then you use your judgment to narrow down what possible questions it might be experiencing. Okay. I got a comment from Randy McCourt. It's about our last Oregon ITE webinar that where we had 2 presentations about safety video and analytics. If you missed that webinar, IT International is hosting 2 joint section meetings, one on June 24th, the other on June 25th, with similar content. If you're interested, you can go to the IT calendar for the meeting registration links. The next question is for Patrick. As we see the traffic coming back in the region, especially in the PM peak hours, what plans does ODOT have to respond to those changes?
Yeah, thanks. We're monitoring most arterials weekly to see what the traffic changes are. And we've set some kind of internal thresholds for when we're going to return to the normal time of day plans that we would have run before COVID. I don't know if we've gotten to the point where we've tackled the next challenge, which might come upon reopening, which is a reduction in transit use, and then a subsequent increase in vehicles on arterials, because people are no longer concentrated in buses. They're all taking their personal vehicles. So I don't know if that's something we've thought about much yet, but that would generally require retiming, and we just don't have resources right now to retime for that.
Thank you. I got one more comment. I think it's related to Eamon's presentation this is from Atif Khan. One thing we do is remote into our central system and able to see the real-time time-space diagram. That usually really helps.
Yeah, that's a great, like, if you can do that, use the tools you already have, so if you're able to get the time space diagram from your central system, take advantage of that. The reason why a tool like TrendSync might still be valuable to your organization is that sometimes you may be working on a corridor where there are no comms. Like I've done some projects where we just don't have comms and we have to manually go out and do the changes at the cabinet. So in those situations, that might be useful, but absolutely, there are tools out there that do the similar thing. But I think the lessons that I'm trying to convey here, and I think through Pat as well, is that there's a lot of data that already can tell you what's happening. Let's leverage that, to troubleshoot things rather than guess. Try to eliminate some of the guesswork during implementation. Thank you for that comment.
Yeah.
Yeah, just to build on that, I think the most exciting thing in signal timing right now is being able to measure a lot of things that we used to model or go to some relationship that had been previously researched. I can kind of get into the details of the data more now.
With that, we've answered all of the questions from our attendees. And thank you, Eamon and Patrick, for your presentations. And thank you, everyone, for attending today's webinar. If you have any other questions, please contact Oregon ITE1@gmail.com. We will forward your questions to our presenters and respond. Once you leave today's webinar, you'll receive a follow-up email within 24 hours with a confirmation of your attendance of today's webinar. And our webinar is recorded. If you would like to view a recording of this webinar, you can also contact us. Julie, do you have anything else?
Nothing else from me, but thank you all for attending, and we will see you next time. Our next webinar is June 21st. Be on the lookout for an email from us. And thank you again to our presenters.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for having us.
Thank you, everyone.